Well, you don't need me to tell you. Well, first of all, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for sticking around for the entire day. We really appreciate that. Really great. Yeah, awesome. Round of applause for you guys. Hopefully the food kept you awake and the cookies didn't put you to sleep. But we've got another, Bruce is going to tell you, we have a cocktail party afterwards that we'll round everything out. Thanks to all the online people who are still with us. Again, we've had up to 1,000 people registered online, so I think we've got probably maybe 300 or 400 left at this time. So we have that going, and we've got this national security panel. And as I was starting to say, we are in a time of extraordinary conflict. And so this is a very serious panel to try to work this out, to try to figure out what we're dealing with and the kinds of threats that are going on in depth, which we've touched upon all day long. So let's quickly get through to everybody. Let's start with Beth George, the leader of the strategic risk management practice at Freshfields. She advises boards on private and public companies on risk management, governance, everything. She's taught at Berkeley, Stanford, and NYU Law. I think if you picked up a dictionary and you looked up the word public service, you would see a picture of Beth George. The only thing that bothers me is she's not in the building over at Department of Justice right now, because I personally have always felt safer. Look at all the different titles she's had. Her creds are fire. I think more than anyone today, and that says a lot. Whenever the government asks her, she answers the call and she takes the job to protect all of us. It's really so impressive. But now she's in the private sector and is going to share with you her insights at a level that haven't had before. I look at her as the Carol Danvers of incident response. Captain Marvel. David Lashway on a panel about national security pitfalls and who better to guide us. I love when I call David Lashway and talk to him. He can never even tell me where he is. That's the kind of thing that he's working on. He's more than anything traditional breach coach. He'll lead the litigation, the remediation, every aspect of IR, every level, whatever it is, whatever, if it's a regulator, if it's law enforcement, he's engaged. If the vendors are being blamed, bring in David. He even served as lead counsel for the cyber investigation firm working the hack of the US presidential election. He is the Ethan Hunt of incident response. The more impossible the mission, the more he likes it. So welcome, David. And then we have Luke. Oh yeah, there he is. I didn't say hello to you before. Sorry. So okay, now I didn't see you at the end. Okay, it's like we lose Luke. Luke, incident response partner at StoneTurn and a veteran of IR. I think he goes back to the very first incident response forum. Specializes in situational cyber risks, incident remediation, due diligence. Here's what you probably don't know about Luke is he's also certified as a CISO from Carnegie Mellon and certified network penetration tester. So he'll help you with your governance, and he's sort of like you think about those board members when there's a problem at a company and they'll step in and be your CEO. Luke is, if there's a problem at the company, he can step in and be your CISO. And that's, again, a rare thing. I don't think it's anything that most of the lawyers in this room are just not qualified to do, but he is. And he's the quintessential expert to have in a foxhole. That's really the way I look at Luke. And that makes him the Harry Bosch of incident response, always protecting like a sentinel for his clients. And then last but not least, the last introduction of the day. I know you're all very sad about that. Travis LeBlanc, the chair of Cooley's cyber data privacy practice. He thrives amid the juxtaposition of cyber technology, law, and business. I've worked on several engagements with him. He was the FCC bureau chief. He launched the California Attorney General's privacy protection unit. He's designed a lot of the laws that are privacy enforces. He's one of the few people on the planet who have degrees from Yale, Princeton, Harvard, and Cambridge. I mean, it's so annoying, but you got to give him credit because he's so incredible. What you may not know about Travis is something that's even more amazing. He was appointed to the U.S. Privacy and Civil Liberties Oversight Board, which advises on reviews the U.S. government counterterrorism activities to safeguard privacy and civil liberties. He was unanimously approved under both the former Trump administration, Republican administration, and Democratic administration. And he was fired, and just recently. And you don't expect Travis LeBlanc to sit down if he gets fired. He has filed a lawsuit, and I encourage everybody to take a look at it and to realize the kind of courage it takes to do this sort of thing. It's not a level of courage that most people on the planet have, but I wasn't surprised when I saw that Travis was fighting back. And whatever your politics are, you have to agree that that what Travis is doing is just incredibly admirable. So let's just give a quick round of applause for Travis, because we just want to support him. And, you know, I was going to say that Travis is the Michael Jordan of incident response, but that's not true. Michael Jordan is the Travis LeBlanc of the NBA. And if Travis had a theme song, it would be Seven Nation Army. So thanks, Travis. You keep fighting on, and we're all here to support you. All right?
Thank you, John.
So let's hear about national security, and probably end up getting a little depressed, but at least we'll know what's going on.
Thank you, John. Awesome intros as always. And it's really great to be back at the Incident Response Forum Masterclass. I want to start by thanking all of you for joining us. We are cognizant as this panel that we are separating you from cocktail hour. And so we are going to do our best. I promise that we are going to have what is going to be the best panel you've ever heard on cybersecurity and national security this afternoon. It is a very high bar that we're going to set for you, but we have so much to talk about. There is so many interesting things. This panel, honestly, could not be more timely. The last year has been eventful, to say the least, in this space. Let me briefly paint the background for our conversation. In the last several months, we became aware of one of the most prolific nation-state cyber attacks of our lifetime, the Salt Typhoon intrusion into the telecom companies. We've learned that Chinese nation-state actors, Volt Typhoon, continue to target U.S. companies, particularly those related to critical infrastructure. Then we get what's going on in our own government. I'm sure you've all read about Signalgate. We'll talk about it. We thought it was over until about 48 hours ago. We got Signalgate 2.0, which is back in the news and gives a whole new meaning to the security of sensitive, possibly classified information. What's more, we're seeing the continued dismantling of federal agencies and offices that have built deep expertise in cybersecurity and national security. In any other year, we would have a cyber representative from the government on this panel right here to talk about what the government is doing in the space of national security and cybersecurity. We unfortunately do not have that today. Lastly, we're seeing new rules and regulations impacting cybersecurity and national security, such as the Department of Justice's bulk data transfer rule and changes to the enforcement of existing rules based on the Trump administration's priorities. In short, we have a lot we need to cover, and we're going to try and get as much as we can in. So let's jump in. The Incident Response Forum is an annual event, which means we get the opportunity to reflect on what's happened over the last year in cybersecurity and national security. To that end, I'd like to ask each of our panelists today, what have each of you seen as the biggest developments since we were last gathered for the IR forum? And maybe we can start with Beth and work our way down.
Thanks, Travis, and thanks for having us here today. I think to come back to one of the things that you were talking about this time last year, I was leading a panel on national security and cybersecurity, and I had a DOJ attorney on the panel and someone from the SEC, and of course, everything we were talking about at the time was SEC reporting. And the DOJ attorney said to me, prompted me, said, ask me how many national security exceptions we have granted to the SEC rule that requires you to report material issues within 4 days of discovery. So I asked him, and he said, 0. And then, of course, many of you, like me in this room, had written letters to the SEC when the rules had been proposed, and we wrote in comments and we said, look, there may be material incidents that are so important that we really shouldn't be disclosing them in 4 days because they might have national security implications, or there may be like other reasons, like disclosing them might do more harm to companies than sort of keeping it quiet for a little while or remediate the incident. So anyway, we had this big, like, the DOJ guy and SEC guy started smirking at us like the private sector lawyers. Oh, you thought there should be a national security issue. Fast forward 1 month later, and we're reading in the New York Times, DOJ has granted its first ever national security exception to the SEC disclosure rules. We didn't know what that was at the time, but it was Salt Typhoon. And for those of you who have not followed it closely, Salt Typhoon was essentially a group of Chinese agents hacked into the telecommunications companies of this country and were able to access the wiretapping accesses that the United States government puts into those companies in order to wiretap Americans. I can't think of a bigger exploit that has actually gotten less coverage in mainstream media, where our own law enforcement tools were exploited and used against predominantly government officials and political officials by the Chinese government. That has to be the biggest thing. But I don't know. We'll see.
David, can you top it?
Yeah, thanks so much, Travis. Thank you all for joining today for this conversation. I after that, I'm not going to drink out of my China-made incident response forum mug. You got there, Beth. I'm going to drink out of the bottle now. I urge you all to do the same. Look, I think we're at a time of conflict, and Beth gave one example. I know throughout the day we've had a series of conversations, as we've had every year, generatively, around how this space is advancing. And I think most importantly, from my perspective, how the like-minded, the people in this room and the people on the call participating in these fora, and thank you, gentlemen, for organizing every year. It's such an important event for us to come together as like-minded defenders, confronting these manifested risks in very significant ways. But I think this year was the first time when I asked myself every January 1st a simple question. Was 2024 the year before, 2023 the year before that? Was it the year of the defender, or was it the year of the offender? And there's no question in my mind that 2024, the offender won for the first time in my own personal chart. And the reason for that, one example that you gave, certainly those of us who have been working SALT, working Volt firsthand with the committee, with the China Select Committee up there for hours and hours. You got team members in the back, others, Luke Dombosky sitting in the back, people who are really steeped in national security around cyber and other related national security matters, who are in the trenches on these fights day to day. Those are simple manifestations of events that we deal with as incidents. But I think the biggest change in 2024 for me was that we are now seriously in a time of conflict. I just spent last week for a few hours with the general, the 4-star, who's the combatant commander in charge of the Indo-Pacific. He was very clear. We are in conflict. We are going to make the strait between China and Taiwan a hellscape, his word, not mine. And the first thing that's coming is cyber. And he said that 3 times. The first thing that's coming is cyber. And he made very clear to those of us that were gathered that he's quite confident that we are not organized properly to defend not only Taiwan, but everything that we care deeply about, because all of us who stand for the proposition that John wrote about in his op-ed recently in the New York Times, the right to privacy, the right to security, the right to freedoms, stand with the people of Taiwan, they stand with others in the world as well. And are we organized properly? Your second point, your second observation, Travis, as you know, is near and dear to my heart. Regardless of your politics, left or right, we all know in cyber in particular that workforce has been an issue from the beginning. This group gathered of like-minded individuals knows that when we talk about workforce, and when the Biden administration talked about it, and the Trump administration did a good job before that talking about it out of pre-ONCD days, we were talking about defenders, people who were clicking the widgets on the wall, working with our CISOs, defending. We weren't talking about this group. We weren't talking about people who hold clearances, the people like Beth at DOJ and the Lukes of the world, our friends, right, that we work with very closely, our FBI colleagues, some of us in law firms. Well, now that number is getting smaller. Clearances are getting pulled. People are shifting. So now we have a concern about our own workforce, the true defender workforce, right? The people that guide that shortened supply. So I think from my perspective, 2025, conflict is rising, whether it's from North Korea and all the fake employees and everything else, Salt, Volt, and the follow-ons for those. I will tell you, just in the last 5 days, the ransomware numbers that we're seeing, along with some guys that were gone, that the FBI and we and people in this room were intimately involved with taking out, they're back. They're back in the last 48 hours. Guys who are on the OFAC list have come back to ransom companies in the United States just in the last 48 hours. And we're telling them in those chats that you heard the last panel talk about that we can't pay you. And you know what their response is? Figure out a way. Figure out a way. Recognizing that conflict in our legal situation, that the rule of law is eroding, they're back in that game. So from my perspective, again, I think the peacetime CISO and the peacetime privacy cyber lawyer, those days are over. It is time for the conflict general and the conflict cyber lawyer.
It's going to be that kind of party.
Would you like a drink?
I'm literally switching up my talking points and the tone and tenor of them as we speak here, so I'll be able to actually maybe speak more freely. But my perspective is a little bit different than theirs, kind of coming as a near 100% commercial operator, assisting orgs, some of the largest enterprises in their aftermath of other kind of national security oriented security compromises that they've had, or also working with organizations sometimes that didn't even know that they were a national security consideration and dealing with that for the first time through some sort of government inquiry. So I'm bringing that sort of slant to the table. But I would, as I resynthesize with some of the many things that were said today, which were all great, I do think the expansiveness of the adversary that we're all talking about here, the expansiveness of their operation, the creativity of it, and in many ways how large the corporate enterprise is now, with the near at will ability to leverage things like zero-day exploitation. We're seeing exploits that you'd think would be like the once-in-a-lifetime card that they'd play, but they're seemingly at any occasion bringing those to the table and almost exploiting at will against enterprises. In many cases, are too big for our Western commercial entities to protect themselves. And when you combine that with a free and open market that is responsible for protecting portions of the critical infrastructure that it also owns, and I hear messaging from an active conflict standpoint, I would say that the bayonets proverbially are probably not as up as they should be. And I would say some of the tactics that they're also leveraging with some of these exploits at the edge are kind of more other novel, because there is aspects of EDR avoidance, as an example, now with some of their tactics and how creative they are, shift to leveraging third parties for management, large management, corporate enterprise. So there's sort of this disassociation effect of ownership and knowledge for the owners of these enterprises to even see and know their own networks well enough anymore to see when these activities are occurring. So this confluence is even more concerning, and just be sitting on this panel. So I would generally say that shift is significant in terms of the ability of the adversary to rise and almost nearly exploit at will. I don't think that should be kind of understated or underthought of.
I think it's a really important point. I mean, maybe a quick comment on that. So, we had Alexei, head of cyber command over in Ukraine. Someone who's been working in Ukraine for a long time. We were talking about 0 days, and exactly your point. He said, how you say your 0 day is my Tuesday. He said, and what he meant by that was obviously in the first week, right? We had 7 to 9 0 days that the Russians burned, and then we saw just one after another. We're seeing the same thing coming out of China. Just the number of 0 days we're seeing in some of the platforms that we're on, right? They're willing to burn it combining that with what I think, we got comfortable, I think, in 2024, at least at the beginning of 24, with, to Beth's point, this idea that, oh, this is espionage. They're sitting in wait. And at first, when we did our first Bolt Typhoon matter, I thought, we talking to NSA, talking to Bureau, talking to all our friends in the space, thinking, okay, they're sitting in wait. This is espionage. Let's get them out. Let's contain. Let's kick them out. Well, in the old days, we'd kick them out. We'd do an exfil, get them out. And then on the day, some weekend, you all been through this, and they would go. The problem that we saw with Bolt was they didn't go. They came back. We can't get them out of satellite systems. We can't get them out of critical infrastructure at ports. We can't get them out of water systems. And they don't care. The name and shame idea that we used to use, combined with the rule of law principle to say, we now see you're there, and we're going to fight you hand-to-hand combat with everybody we can bring to bear, they don't care. And that is a very different conflict posture for the companies that all of you work with and for, who are at the front lines of this conflict, when it's not an event that ends. And you're trying to explain to the board that you're going to be operating your business with the Chinese PLA in your network for as far as we can see in the near term, because we can't get them out.
David, to that point, can I ask, because I think it's really important, especially as I see only about a handful of people on their phones right now after that. I mean, Beth, are our phones secure? I mean, David's telling us that they're still in the network. Are the lines secure right now? And are you seeing an uptick in nation-state activity, particularly following the National Security Advisor using Signal to communicate?
So, where to start with that one? So, I think that when you think about the security of our phones, we have to think about the fact that this penetration happened. We have had Verizon and AT&T come out and say we've gotten them out. That took months. It was only in February or late January that they said that they were able to get them out, and I wouldn't be particularly comfortable in assuming that that's what's happened. I think last fall you had, for the first time, a senior DHS official and a senior FBI official advise Americans that they should be using encrypted communications for all of their communications, including phone calls. They haven't pulled that back. I don't know if they really intended to go that far, if that was a little bit off their talking points at the time, but it was, it was really symbolic of the moment and the really deep concern in the government about how far the penetration had gone. I think when you're talking about using Signal, I suppose the question that you should be asking yourself from the U.S. government perspective is why the United States government doesn't have encrypted, unclassified communication systems that are proprietary that they're using. That would seem to be sort of solution number one. And then if you're asking yourself that question, maybe you should be asking, why am I not using secured, unclassified encryption communication systems as well? Like, why are we still using email that's not encrypted, that is so vulnerable, that we deal with breach after breach after breach with? And that's part, and as we're seeing companies invest in and create encrypted communications like Signal, like iMessage, they're actually quite easy to use and quite accessible. Of course, they're only as secure as the company that you keep within your message system. So, put a caveat there. But I don't think there's any disagreement among those who work in national security that even for unclassified communications, you would be better off encrypting them.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge to sort of see, as we're all stuck with the networks that we have and trying to transform the way people communicate overnight to move them all off of one system to another when they have two sides of their own lives. They have their personal life and their business life. And the idea that they're only going to communicate one way on one side and a different way on the other just seems a little bit of a challenge when you try to advise them. And then, of course, we have the challenge, as David was telling us, of the adversary is continuing to try to come back and penetrate into even our more secure networks. A real challenge we have.
Absolutely.
Yeah. David, by the way, let me just ask an important question for everyone here, because the biggest change in the last year has clearly been the Trump administration, no doubt about that. But what a lot of people are wondering is who's in charge. right? Who's running cyber policy for the United States right now? And more importantly, if you have a breach, who do you call? Can we call all the same people that we've been calling before, or is there a new Rolodex that's needed?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question. So first, maybe we start with Congress. Right, what have we seen out of Congress so far with the new administration? I think we've had 5 bills passed. One is a continuing resolution, 3 are sort of maintenance, and the other one's sort of a little bit of noise. So we've had no legislation coming out of Congress, but a lot of activity on the national security committees and cyber committees. A lot of discussion around the fact that the monies that were appropriated last year have not been spent so far. We've got White House saying, look, I'm not going to continue to appropriate dollars to things like national security and cyber until you spend the money that I appropriated previously. So from a congressional standpoint, looking backward over the last few months, we've got a pretty challenging situation. But we also know that we have a forcing mechanism going forward with Congress because we got CERCIA expiration and a few other, our CIS expiration and a few other programs that folks are very focused on, including things like, hack back legislation, the reprisals of those, and letters marked programs that the White House, National Security Advisor, and obviously members of the committee really care deeply about. So I would not keep my eye on Congress if I were in this room. With respect to the White House itself, look, ONCD is getting stood up. There are some very talented people as part of that program. The president has been supportive of that program so far, and the folks that are being considered for those roles, some of them come with diverse backgrounds. Some of them are hardcore cyber and national security people. So I think we remain very hopeful that ONCD will continue with its really important mission and will continue to lead and be a part of that National Security Council advisory function for the president around cybersecurity. The National Security Council staff are focused on cyber. They're holding meetings. You can get a meeting with them and have good, robust discussions around what they're thinking, what they want to promote on Capitol Hill and enable. Are those discussions different, and are some of the strategies different? Yes, they are, but they're engaging. At the agency level, obviously, we know we've got some challenges ahead with respect to certain of the agencies and what might happen with state, for example. Obviously, at DoD, one of the core commands in cyber, the debate's continuing with NSA around the 2-hat, 1-hat, as we all know. They're still on the wall, obviously, and they're still very helpful in the matters we're handling. I know Luke's got matters and others have matters around the room where they're still being very helpful to us, thankfully. And we expect that to continue, and they're committed to the mission, as are the people in this room. Look, we're going to get the talent, hopefully, in those roles in the near term, get folks through the approval processes, and make sure that we're fit for purpose, maybe with a little bit of a different mission set or a different view of that. But hopefully, people see the value of defending. I'll add 2 more quick points. One is the idea of having that sort of public-private sector capability to do takedowns in a more proactive manner, offensive cyber, as it's been called in the past. That is on the table. And if you are not in that dialogue and you are someone who has spent the entire day in this room, I urge you to get in that dialogue. It is an important one about what the rules of that should be, how we're going to define things, who should do it, when we should do it, why we should do it, who we should target, and where. There are people in this room that represent the people who actually own those systems, even though they may be in foreign jurisdictions. Big US companies, right? Google, Microsoft, Amazon. Having American companies attacking American infrastructure that happens to be located abroad poses some really significant questions for the people in this room. So I'd urge you to get involved in that. It's an important dialogue that we're going to have, whether folks want it or not. It's happening. And then secondly, DoD has made very clear that they want to have durable and resilient ongoing campaigns that are cyber related. They want to get out of the onesies and twosies, let's go take down this infrastructure. They want to have a warlike combatant commander approach to taking down bad infrastructure at a time of conflict and pre-conflict. And that discussion is happening. Some of us are in it from a national security standpoint, and frankly, just from a cyber standpoint, because second, third, fourth order effects that may result from that type of conflict are going to be potentially significant. And I would again urge the people in this room to get involved in those discussions, to share your views around what that may mean for you as a practitioner in this space, and someone who is, a student of it, and somebody who cares deeply about those outcomes.
We should talk a bit about DOJ's bulk data transfer rule. A lot of people are talking about that. And, it obviously the fact that the administration let it go into effect, I think, and keep it around tells us something about the administration's cyber priorities. How does it fit into other trends that you're seeing from a regulatory perspective, like CFIUS? And maybe you can also provide us a little bit of background on the rule for the audience.
Sure. I might leave some of the rule stuff to the attorneys in the room just because it gets touchy sometimes when consultants start speaking about it. But it's in rule place for now, I guess has kind of been some people's view of the world on that. Kind of two pieces of it that interest me are that a lot of people, a lot of the recent discussion has been about the DOJ rule, but I think a lot of people forget about or have not fully appreciated how CISA has helped develop some of the security requirements related to the implementation of the rule. And the premise of it is, and this is partly a kind of a layperson's interpretation of it because I'm not an attorney, but where one, it can be used for political means. Even CISA's description of it says overtly that it is a political tool just as much as it is a tool to protect the data of American citizens. But ultimately, it's sort of this overarching objective is to protect personal information or covered information, particularly in transactions associated with personal information of U.S. citizens. And how I think that initially is similar to some of the other kind of where national security issues meet private sector, at least in the work that we see, is both in the Committee for Foreign Investment in the United States. They've taken special interest also in terms of the covered information or protected assets of interest potentially to CFIUS. And then I think we're also seeing it in other aspects of critical infrastructure, this commonality of protecting the data itself just as much as some of the other aspects that go into interest of national security when a private enterprise is in scope, meaning we're just as concerned about the data itself as we are the broader story of policy and procedure, practices, control frameworks, and so forth, because I think what the USG sort of recognized, particularly with the intricacies of, again, this is just my interpretation of dealing with all kinds of hairy security issues with data, is data just proliferates. Derivative data, just enterprises built on the value of data and the implications of the value of that to our adversaries. So huge emphasis on that. I think from a prioritization standpoint, it's very much China focused, countering China. The organizations, we saw a huge uptick, not only just with the DOJ rulemaking and certain compliance readiness components to the CISA security requirements, but the uptick was massive with kind of China-oriented firms, either by ownership or where they know that data may be kind of processed, transacted, stored from a Chinese operating entity. But that's been a significant uptick, as you might imagine, over the last quarter or first quarter of the year and to now. In fact, even one other data point kind of coming off that where I think this is kind of creeping in the daily life, which we may talk about if we have time. But I mean, even my own firm issued a national security-oriented warning literally an hour before I jumped on this panel for protecting your personal devices traveling overseas for executives and so forth. So I just think that the interests are kind of continue to grow and expand in terms of corporations, and I think the national security consideration is a much more aware thing, I think, to the corporate enterprises it's ever been by virtue of the data that's taken interest by the government.
Yeah, you just raised, you just raised a very practical issue. It may be one thing that this audience can really take away today, which is, if you are traveling abroad or you're a company that has employees abroad and they are bringing devices with them, what is your company doing, or what advice would you give as to how to ensure the security of your communications or precautions that you should take?
Yeah, I think for probably the last decade and a half or two, even, there's been a general awareness, I think, by larger corporate enterprises to, take certain precautions with their personal and mobile devices to certain kind of more higher risk portions of the world. I think that footprint it literally overnight has changed, just given the geopolitical and political utility of some of the national security considerations, not only our own country may apply, but also even countries that I think we've formally considered friendly. I think Beth alluded to perhaps the backdoor dynamic already in the UK. I think organizations should be thinking, one, how do they train their global employees at border crossing in terms of their devices and what they do if they get detained. And two, I think organizations are going to have to revisit their policies in terms of, we're all familiar with burner devices and kind of certain communication protocols, I think, in certain portions of the world, but I think that's going to expand and or, add an element of overhead there. But I do think everyone should sort of be cognizant of, particularly in this room, things like, having some training or preparedness about like what's attorney's eye only that might be on your devices or other aspects of practical labeling that takes place in our professions. And I think training on communication on that at border crossings is like legitimate. And I think from a process and detection perspective, to the extent that those devices get confiscated, organizations may have to figure out new protocols on potentially how to detect, one, if they have information that could be now at risk, but then two, how do we practically think about implants on our devices to the extent that they were, or how do we detect changes in integrity in ways that we haven't had to think about, especially when we're dealing even with more advanced adversaries than we have been over the last decade.
I mean, just to add, I think one of the things that's happened is that we've come to a recognition, I think, at a policy level now, that we are a $27 trillion GDP economy, the world's largest. Over 70% of that is based upon consumer behavior. Take that in. Our economy is based upon clicking and people going to stores to buy goods. China is under 15%. They're a manufacturing economy. Xi has enabled new programs just in the last few months to try to shift some of that, increase their consumer behavior portion of their economy to balance it out. And we, at the same time, with the Trump administration, going back to your initial question, have said we need a more industrialized economy, reducing consumer behavior driving the 70%. Xi is going up, we want to come down. That is resulting in a fundamental policy shift, like things like bulk data transfer. I don't know whether the judge who just broke up the ad tech business at Google had that on his mind when he said, look, this is just not good for the economy, or is it really an antitrust situation? I'm going to leave that to the judge. But in any event, that is going to have a profound impact on the clicks, which will affect the 27 trillion. And if the people in this room from a cyber perspective aren't thinking about those macroeconomic shifts and what it means to cross a border when we're trying to make those types of changes, when we're implementing new policies like PADFA that nobody paid attention to PADFA when the statute was passed. Now people are asking after April 6th and April 8th, what the hell is PADFA? Can you explain that to me? And then where did this executive order come from? And why is it 200 pages long? And can you give me a chart so I can understand it? We have dozens of matters on that executive order, dozens of matters trying to implement compliant regimes on top of the hundreds of ransomware matters our practice currently has. So when you combine these types of events and understanding, as other large practices in this room are confronting the same types of questions, what are those larger trends going to look like? Well, I got to tell you, I don't see anyone in this room getting slower over the next 6 months. This is going to get a lot more complicated, and we're only going to see more programs like the executive order coming our way. We've got over 99 executive orders, right? We've got over 100 executive orders out of this administration so far. The president's made clear that every day at 3 o'clock, he is holding the 3 o'clock hour to sign something if it's ready to be signed. Every single day. So there's more to come here.
Yeah, I haven't looked at the news today, so I'm not sure what today's was. But what I do know from the border standpoint, and it's important to remind everyone, is the Fourth Amendment does not apply at the border in the same way that it does to the rest of the country. And there's this perception that the conversation that we're having is a conversation about foreigners that are coming to the United States. But when you are a U.S. citizen at the border, your rights are not the same. And so this is actually an issue that every organization that has people that are transiting borders has to think about, irrespective of their citizenship and the risks that are there. And the risks are not just about what the government may be able to obtain from the device that they have right there. It's also now we're back dealing with what they may get from the cloud, right? We saw what the UK is trying to get Apple to create a backdoor. It kind of reminds me of deja vu of San Bernardino, and Apple. And so, Beth, I guess the next question we have to ask is, should we be concerned that either Congress or the administration is going to seek backdoors, even if we get those encrypted communications?
It's a good question. So there has been, for as long as data has existed, sort of a debate between securing that data and the government's legitimate need to access it in investigations, right? And so we have had this debate for a very long time, encryption versus surveillance, boiled down to a very basic level. And most recently, the United Kingdom has ordered Apple, who has some of the best-in-class encryption, for it to create a key for the United Kingdom to be able to access those communications. So if you look at the government's ability to protect its crown jewels, such as access to these kinds of things, you would find that we have a very poor success rate. Whether that is Edward Snowden, who managed to take some of the most important information out of the NSA, OPM breach, where China managed to hack the security clearances of the vast majority of United States government employees, Vault 7, where we just had a conviction of a CIA analyst who was leaked a great deal of cyber tools that the CIA had created, Hal Martin, who did something very similar at the NSA, and so forth and so on. And then our wiretap accesses, which are probably the most important surveillance tool that the United States government has to be able to conduct surveillance inside the United States. We allowed China to access them. I don't say this with any kind of glee. It is devastating to me that the United States government doesn't seem to be able to protect its own assets. These are the crown jewels of the United States, and yet it seems constantly, on a yearly basis, we have another leak. And so at some point, governments really need to look themselves in the face and say, are we granting ourselves access to something that we cannot secure? And I think the answer here is yes. I think it is a very, very dangerous thing. And I say this as someone who is a surveillance attorney, who very much thinks that, I worked before the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, had a very good record in front of that court. Added 1,000. But as someone who thinks that government access to information is incredibly important, that we have to think more creatively about how we're going to get access to that government, and that these blunt force tools that we are creating to get access may create more risks for the public than they do contribute to the safety if we're going to continue to do this and we're going to continue to lose our crown jewels as a government.
And this is a huge issue for PQC, right? One of the big initiatives in 2024 that the United States government pushed forward at the end of the Biden administration and into this administration was the NIST standard for PQC, post-quantum encryption capability. That standard came out 1 week later. One company, as we sit here on this panel this afternoon, has been cleared by NIST for post-quantum encryption capability with sufficient cryptographic algorithms that pass that test. It's a company that was originally based in Switzerland. They are moving their headquarters to the United States, thankfully, and they will make us as dark as we have ever been. That could be a very good thing in certain applications, to your point, and a very scary thing in other applications. But that's a requirement, right? In the United States and under DORA, if you read DORA carefully, which many people in this room do, and I see one guy I know who's read it very carefully. When you read DORA carefully, some people are interpreting some of the language in DORA as almost requiring consideration of quantum capability on the encryption side. And others are looking at the US standards for critical infrastructure the same way. That technology is here now. It's only been here for a few months. And if one is not familiar with that and how dark we will go, because there is no breaking that algorithm. It is designed to combat a quantum computer that doesn't exist yet. That's the level of encryption that Terra produces. And it's a fascinating exercise in this question that we've been debating from San Diego all the way through to Snowden and otherwise, like how secure should we make our information? That question has gotten answered for us by NIST, which is quantum proof.
Well, unfortunately, our time this afternoon has come to an end. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please join me in the call.
Wow. Travis, thank you. Really, that was a fascinating way to end this day. I really appreciate that panel. That was terrific and a great way to wrap up. Can we get a quick round of applause for Mr. Stark here with the very unique and energetic and just delightful introductions all day. Thank you, John. I'd like to thank the 35 consulting and law firms that were represented today as sponsors and supporters of the event. And thank you again to all the panelists, everybody for being with us, both here and online. For those of you here in person, we have a great cocktail party. It's in the courtyard. Apparently it's a beautiful day. I haven't stepped outside, but a gorgeous day. So you go up the stairs, you take the elevator. We'll have some people kind of pointing away, but you can't miss it. It's the main courtyard on the lobby level. And thank you to our friends at Cypher for sponsoring the cocktail party. Also, at the cocktail party, we'll be announcing our Incident Response 50 for 2025. That's Cybersecurity Docket's list of the best incident response attorneys in the industry. It's a good list, you'll see. Finally, please, for the sake of John's marriage, take some of these toolboxes home. And if you would, these are for you, so please take these hats. I don't want to drag these home either. We'll see you in the courtyard in just a couple minutes. Thank you.